And hello everyone, welcome back to another C++ tutorial. So, in the previous tutorial we did talk about functions in C++. So, if you did not see that video, I highly recommend you do, because in this tutorial we'll be building off of the knowledge we gained from the previous tutorial. Alright. So let's start with just creating a basic output. So I'm going to just cout, and I'm going to maybe say sum of 10 and 9. Now what I want to do is I want to create a function that returns an integer. I'm going to call it sum. So I'm going to take in an int 6, or int x and int y. Then here we can just say return x plus y. Now this works like any normal function would work. As you see, it can add those two together. But now the problem is, what if we wanted to do a double in here? A floating point value. So let's say 10 point and then a very long number after it, like that. What if we wanted to do that? Because currently it will still work, but it's just going to return 19. Because to it, this just gets removed. It's not important because it takes in integers. So a way to get around this is by just copying this piece of code you have, and then to just take all of the types and double it. Now this is called function overloading. It is when you have the function with the same name, but different arguments. For example, here you can take in integers, and here you can take in doubles. Take note, I am using doubles here instead of floats, because integers and floats have a very interesting connection to each other in C++. So just use doubles to be safe so you don't get any problems. Anyways, so basically it's the same code, but now it will figure out which one we want. So here you can see it's 20.1549. And if we go here to remove that floating point value to just that, it will be able to tell the difference between, do we want an integer or do we want a double? Do we want to call this sum or do we want to call this sum? Based on what we pass in. We could even say convert it to an integer, return an integer. I don't know if this won't give an error, but yeah, see, it works perfectly fine. So as long as these change, you are able to overwrite a function in a sense, to overload it by giving it another meaning. And the same can be said with, let's say we have a function that says hello. So let's say void say hello. And this one takes in a string called name and just returns, or it actually just counts hello and then the name. Now if we were to go here and say hello Jack, the normal function as we learned in the previous video, and we're to add our semicolon, then we get hello Jack. Now we can actually take this and we can expand upon it. So now we can say, instead of just that, we can maybe add an int here, that's age. And then here we can pass in and then of course we have now two of these functions with the same way of executing, but now it's a little bit different. And now here we can say int a or int age. And here we can say let's something like 29. Both of these will work perfectly fine. And it knows which one to search for because of the parameters that it take in. This one could even return, let's say, an std string. And then instead of couting this, we could just return it. So the output can change. Everything can change. I'm not going to actually do that because that's going to be a lot of typing. But the output can change. And everything can change. But the name can stay the same. That is called function overloading. You could even, if you wanted to, remove the name. That is perfectly fine. And now we can just say you are 8 years old. And in here we can of course remove that, and this will work perfectly fine. If we were to convert this into a void, again, because it shouldn't be returning anything, here you see, you were 29 years old. If we were to remove that part there, it would look better, but you get the point. So you can basically have a function of the same name, but that takes different arguments and even returns something different if the time calls for it. Now, when should you do function overloading? Let's say, for example, the first one we had, where we had a sum. So if we go back to our first one we had here, so let's go back to sum, there we go. If we go back to this is a great way to have it, because now you can do sum, but you can have multiple types. So as you can see here, this is a great time to do this. Now, when shouldn't you do this? Basically, when the functions have nothing to do with each other anymore. If you say sum, but you take in, let's say, std string name, and now you just basically return the name, and this can also become an std string, like that. This function has nothing to do with the original sum function. So by doing this, you're basically just going to confuse yourself, because what does sum have to do with name? Unless you actually have a good reason for it. So do function overloading when you have two functions that do basically the same thing, but just change in types. But don't do function overloading when you just want to add another function, but you are too lazy to give it another name. In this case, you could just say return name, like that. Then you would know this is a completely different function, and it's not really going to do the sum of anything. And that is the very basics of overloading functions in C++. This is just a very basic example, but it can be used in a lot more complex environments. Thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all again in the next C++ tutorial.